Hello, and welcome to Film Slam Stream's post-film conversation for Heritage Day. My name is Eric Siler, and I'm an instructor of film, media arts, and communications, as well as moderator for this conversation. We're very pleased to be joined by the director of Heritage Day, Lara Everly. Lara is an award-winning director who celebrates female-driven content and dark comedy. Laura has a sharp wit and a clever comedy sensibility that first gained attention in her first sketch content. She's adept at bringing humor to unexpected topics and disrupting the status quo. She's worked on numerous projects and has won all sorts of awards. Joining us from Los Angeles, Lara Everly. Hello, Laura, and welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's so good to have you as well too. It's just great to see someone do comedy really well. Were you always a comedic person, or is this something that came about as you grew up?
Yes, I think that, my work is a mirror of kind of who I am and what my essence naturally is. I think the truth is I'm a very sensitive person. I am very observant and empathetic, and I think it's hard for me to miss what's going on around me. But when you are so absorbent and so aware of the world around you, you carry a lot of pain and like just all, the whole plethora of human feelings. And I think a way to compost that is humor for me. If I can kind of metamorphosize it and regurgitate it back out into the world with a little bit of a comedic bent or a subversive bent, or, if we can kind of like laugh at it, then we can process these things more versus just feeling overwhelmed and swallowed whole.
Absolutely. It's a way to help process things and process life as well. But uh, I understand this film was inspired by your childhood, the experiences that you went through as a child, but it took you until maybe a couple of years ago to actually make this film. Why did
Yeah,
you decide to do it now?
it's a great question. I think two things are true at the same time. One is just like where I was at in my career and where I'm at kind of in my life and finding my voice and not being afraid to handle difficult topics. I think the more I was able to successfully bring humor to more unexpected topics or more challenging topics, in other aspects of my career, whether it was reproductive rights or gun safety or other issues that have been sensitive, and seeing that it succeeds, I got the courage and the confidence to say, I can actually bring this to the Holocaust. And usually, like, even when I would pitch it to like even my sister, she'd be like, oh, that sounds that sounds messy. It's scary to say, like, I'm going to tell a narrative about the Holocaust through the lens of dark comedy. This is a topic that is always handled through drama and through documentary. And it's just not something that it's not a usual lens to put on a topic like that. Um, so I think it was just figuring out where I was at in my own career and getting, empowerment with my own voice. But I also think that, like, the world keeps changing. And I think there's more and more stories, unfortunately, of intolerance and of dehumanizing language and behavior. And there's more, I think it's feeling we're in a place now where there's a lot of speaking up about not whitewashing history in schools and all of this stuff. And this is not specific to the Jewish community. Obviously, slavery, genocide, all of these things, this entire country has been built on that. And so it's, I think we're at a place now culturally and globally where there's a lot more open-mindedness to actually talking about these things. But I felt like the only real honest and contained way in was to make it a period piece and to make it, to take place in the 80s and based off of my childhood. But I hope that as much as it is a period piece and very much like, lives within the construct of the 80s, that it is also a now piece and that it brings up conversations about intolerance and how to talk to the next generation about crimes against humanity, about dehumanizing language, and how do we not just sweep history. Obviously, you don't want to traumatize children, but you also just can't sweep it under the rug entirely. I mean, yes, it was based off of an incident in my own childhood where I had an assignment in fourth grade where I had to do a presentation as a relative. So the assignment was to dress up as a relative and do the presentation as them, sort of like present a monologue as this relative. And I was kind of estranged from my mom's mom on that side. And so I wanted to do my dad's mom, but I'd only ever gotten very broadcast safe information about the Holocaust. Like I knew what happened, and I knew that she was in Bergen-Belsen for 3 years, from ages 14 to 17, which is extremely unusual. I knew my grandfather was there too, but for a shorter time. But I really had no concrete details. I had no stories. And for some reason, that day when I called her, on the landline, and I explained my assignment and started asking her some questions, for some reason, she just opened up and started telling me stories, like specific stories about how she escaped the gas chamber because she was small and she hid in this box used for toilet paper. I mean, there are lines that came straight from her mouth that are in the film. And I attempted to do what Evie, the little girl in the film, does in real life, but my parents cut me off. I was intending to dress up like my grandmother, a concentration camp prisoner, and do a presentation as her and tell her story. My parents were like, oh God, no, we do not like dress up like concentration camp prisoners. We can't do this. And I understand where they were coming from. And I also felt like it was cultural erasure. Like this was my heritage. Why can't I talk about it? It's tricky. I don't know what the answer is entirely, but it stuck with me, right? And I've always had I think a bit of a fiery part of myself that speaks up for like justice and making what is in the shadows come to the light. So I think that for me personally, that was always like, why can't we talk about these things? If this is a part of our family history, why couldn't I, as a kid, stood up there and been like, this is what happened?
Well, thank you for that detailed explanation. Let's talk specifically now about the film. You mentioned that you pitched it to your sister and she was a little iffy about it, but you convinced a lot of people that this was going to work. Tell us a little bit about greenlighting this project and how this project all came together.
Yeah. I mean, listen, short films are total labor of love. So it was a combination of a grant, crowdfunding, and actually a little bit of money that came from the sale of my grandparents, who the film is inspired by, their house. Because it went, after my aunt passed away, it went on the market right before the film. So I kind of took my small inheritance of the house and then roped it into this film about them. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, it wasn't that difficult to encourage the talent to come on. We didn't have a casting director. We didn't hold auditions. Everything was just an offer. I had worked with Vivian Lyra Blair, that little girl who plays Evie in the film, and she really carries the entire film. And it's not an easy role for a then 9-year-old to play. It's a heavy topic and a lot of nuance. And then it was very important for me to cast authentically as well. So for her mom, and the film is really kind of told through the perspective of the mother. It was important for me to cast an actress that was both a mom in real life and Jewish in real life. And I had sent it to Rachel, and she said yes. She read it. Her in-laws had survived the Holocaust, so she had connective tissue as there. And yeah, I mean, from there, we literally just, everything was like an offer. It was still kind of COVID-y. There was like no rehearsals. It was just a real like leap of faith to cast these people via just emails and then show up on day one and make it happen.
Wow. Well, what about your producer and production designer?
Yeah.
Talk about that. Finding all those items and the set, the location. Tell us more about that.
My producer is one of my fabulous work wives who I've worked with a bunch of times and I intend to work with a lot. Elise Lou Stemp. This was maybe our like eighth or ninth project together. And we work really well together. We have a real yin and yang. I'm kind of the like more passionate, sometimes can even be like mercurial when I'm like fighting for the integrity of something. Very like creative, and she is very like calm and level-headed and business oriented. And so she, I kind of feel like she's like the string to my balloon and it works really well. And we had been talking about this project for a long, long time. So when it finally, when we finally had the resources to pull it off, she was on board, and I couldn't have done it without her. Um, and then actually, Vivian Lyra Blair, the little girl in it, came on as a producer as well. And her mom were instrumental in making the film come to life. They helped bring on some of the crew. She had just finished playing Princess Leia in the new Star Wars movie, and she brought on her costumer from that. And they were really helpful in kind of like bringing, all those puzzle pieces together. And also,
Wonderful.
I will say I'd worked with our cinematographer several times before. We had, I want to say like 95% female cast, and we had a lot of moms on the crew. So our cinematographer was actually like 8.5 months pregnant with her second kid when we filmed. Our other camera operator on the film was a mom who I've worked with many times. Our composer was a mom. It was like a real kind of wolf pack of mothers making this film that has really ultimately is about three generations of women. So there's a lot of themes of motherhood and in the film.
How much fun was it making this film? How long did you take to film? I know when you film a comedy, there could be a lot of humor, a lot of suggestions and so forth. Tell us a little bit about how long it took and the atmosphere of filming this.
Sure. We filmed it in 3 days, which is pretty quick. We had one day at the school, which was the school where my kids go, and we were able to rent out the school on a weekend to use. Luckily, the school didn't need a ton of like production design. Production design, when you're doing a period piece, is a big lift. And our production designer Dan was fantastic, and he had a huge task in front of him. But it was just a little bit of like art and stuff on the walls, and the costumes really sort of like took us into the 80s. But we filmed in like the actual principal's office of the school for the principal scene, and then we did 2 days in a house, and we spent a long time trying to find a house that felt like it could have the bones to take place in the mid 80s. And I actually grew up with a pool very similar to the one it feels very like specifically like Los Angeles Valley, with like that old diving board that are no longer considered even like legally safe. But they had all of that. And I was like, yeah, this is the house. So yeah, it was 3 days. It rained through like half of it, which was like really challenging, just sound wise even and stuff. And then to be honest, like we had a lot of fun, but you throw a bunch of kid extras, you're working with a child actor, there's a baby who can be on set for a very limited amount of time. There was a dog. Like I really sort of felt like I was juggling the entire time. Like that one scene where the dog runs out. We didn't have a trained dog. It was my dog. The little Nazi dog is lying here at my feet right now. There was a baby. There was an unfenced pool. I was just like, this is stressful. And you have a scene in your head as a writer. You picture how it's going to go when you're the writer director, and then something entirely different is happening. And it's so it's my job to kind of bridge those things, but like, okay, let's work with what is actually happening, even though it's so different from what I had on the page. So there was a lot of like, you know, pivoting and reworking. I will say that the principal scene with Rachel Bloom there was a lot of fun there. There was a lot of improvising about like, you know, just like low key mom shaming and like, you know, the awkwardness of having your child continue to dress like a, you know, prisoner from the Holocaust in the 80s when fitting in is like very important and everyone's wearing like neon and it's like a more like, you know, there wasn't a lot of, I think, range to kind of be different. And so there was a lot of fun in that scene, a lot of improv.
Tell us about the response to the film. Now that it was completed, what did your sister say? And, you know, other relatives and other people, what's the response to the film?
It's been a really positive response. To be honest, I was slightly nervous showing it to my parents. Um, just because there is a lot of tension in the film between the parents and the child. You know, the parents are coming in and sort of suppressing the child's interest in her heritage. And I didn't want my parents to feel attacked in any way. And I think that they were really good about like understanding the nuance of all of it and how this was like inspired by, but not like a direct depiction of them. And so I think there wasn't really any ego involved there, which was a relief personally. But the audiences responded really, really well. You know, there's been like the occasional person in a Q&A that's like, well, you really did something crazy there. And I'm like, okay, like you can think that, like that's okay. Like I'm not afraid of like making people a little bit uncomfortable. The Holocaust is uncomfortable. It's extremely uncomfortable. That's kind of my point. So like, you know, there's been the occasional person that seems like shifty or acts like I've done something outrageous. And I'm like, yeah, this is outrageous material, you know, and like if we don't talk about it, this is why history repeats itself. But for the most part, it's been really, really positive, and it's been really neat watching like minors, even my own children, watch the film and have it invoke questions for them. And Vivian's been really wonderful at showing up to as many screenings as she can and standing there as a child in front of an audience and saying what it meant to her and the importance of communication between your family, especially now, because with Google and the internet, you can look up anything and be exposed to totally not age appropriate information. And there is a responsibility as a parent to communicate what is like, to communicate clearly, but also in an age appropriate way and to talk about these more difficult topics. If we don't talk about it, kids are going to figure it out on their own, right? Like, whatever it might be, whatever resource, kids are going to find out what they want to find out. And so we might as well be there to guide them through that.
Absolutely. You know, we're wrapping up here in a few moments. The script, you carried this script around with you for a long time, even though you didn't actually write it until later on, but since a child and up until, you know, now when you wrote it, and now that it's been produced and, you know, screened and so forth, looking back, would you do anything differently? Are you really pleased with how everything turned out?
Part of me feels like I wish I just made it a feature from the beginning. And I would still like to make the feature film version. I think like it's a long short. And I think that uh you know, once you're in it and you've got this crew and you've got this talent, it's like a part of me is like, I should have just gone the distance and like figured out a way to like make this a feature from the beginning. To me, the grandmother is such an important role as the person who survived And her present is very strong and the short, but in like a phantom way. We never actually meet her. And I think that there could be something extremely rewarding about, the sort of Little Miss Sunshine dynamic between a granddaughter and a grandmother, that have, kind of been estranged. And there's been this broken dynamics in the family, learning about this whole part of her own heritage and family history. So, yeah, I mean, to be honest, I wish I just didn't like go for like the full Monty from the beginning.
Well, you still can, and I think it worked out well because to introduce the grandmother, you have to still carry that whole comedic aspect of it
Oh
as
yeah.
well. So that's really a challenge to bring that sensitivity in. But you can do it. You could have done it, but maybe next time.
Yeah, no, I mean totally. I think that the truth is I don't think it's just sitting there sad talking about the Holocaust. I think a lot of these Holocaust survivors had to disassociate in order to keep going. There was a lot that was buried. So in my mind, she is someone that isn't just sitting there in the pain. It's not. It takes a lot of work to get the information out. And I could see like a total dichotomy of like what kind of life she's living in Los Angeles in the 80s. It feels very different from what she survived as a young teen.
Absolutely. Uh, I have to ask you this question. I'm sure someone may have asked you this question. You have children of your own. They come to you, Mom, it's Heritage Day. I would like to dress up as a Holocaust survivor. What will your response to them be?
Yeah, no, it's no one has asked me this question. So it's a good one. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that like I would have to say yes. And I think that there's, yeah, I would have to say to say yes. And I think that there's, maybe like a difference between um I know this sounds like specific, but like where you're at in the story. I think like dressing up as slave labor is more complicated than someone that's, um survived it and is like, in the moment of liberation or something. So I think that like, it's finding like where in the timeline are we telling our story or where is our actual costume coming from in like the timeline of events? Because I think that there is so much beauty in telling a story about survival. And I think it's coming from the survival perspective more than it is coming from the victim perspective.
Hmm. Well stated. Well stated. Before I let you go, what's next for you? What can we expect to see from you in the near future?
Yeah, I've got a handful of projects in development right now, but I did just go to the Tribeca Chanel Through Her Lens program in New York, which is a wonderful program for female filmmakers. I would encourage anyone that is women identifying to apply. But they workshop your script with incredible filmmakers, directors, composers, producers, and I would love, hopefully in 2025, to go ahead. I have the seed money for that, and it's a dark comedy about reproductive rights, kind of a road trip, a road trip film, almost like Thelma and Louise, but in this case, Thelma is a dog, and there's reproductive rights spin. So again, bringing humor to a more uncomfortable topic, but it feels extremely topical. It's something that a topic I'm very passionate about. And in today's culture, I think this is something that we need to really like hear more stories about. So having just workshopped that project with some of, my heroes, sheroes, really, I'm hoping that that actually comes into fruition sometime next year.
I hope so too. Keep us posted. We would love to see that.
Yeah, for sure.
This has been great. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I wish you all the best. Lara Everly, Director of Heritage Day. Congratulations on all your success and all the best.
Thank you so much. You too. Take care.
Thank you. And
Bye.
thank you to our audience for joining us for this important and invigorating conversation. For more information about our upcoming events, please visit us at clevelandfilm.org. I'm Eric Siler. Thank you.